Good afternoon, folks. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here today. I also like to welcome the folks from the Live Living Network. It's a group from different places around North America that'll be listening to us today. Go ahead and give you a little quick synopsis of me. How many of you all have never heard me speak before? Oh, good. I don't have to change any jokes. Basically, I am 50% horticulturalist, 50% comedian. You're never going to know which end's going to come out next, so just bear with me. I am a Charleston County Master Gardener Emeritus, class of 2007. I am the manager of Terra Garden Center, North Charleston. Let's see. I currently have 55 varieties of citrus in my yard, 220 camellias in my yard. I'm very competitive. I'm also the president of the local Camellia Society, and you can find out all my information over there. I'm also a classically trained trombone player, former active duty Marine Corps, and originally from New Jersey. Do not hold that against me. Sorry, New Jersey folks. So how many of y'all already grow citrus? That was going to be my next question. How many of you have tried to grow citrus? Okay, yeah, there's always at least a few of those. So this is actually my PowerPoint that I used when I was teaching the Master Gardeners. So it's a 16-hour class, so don't worry about it. We're only going to cover 14. No, I'm kidding. Usually that one goes over better than that, but that's okay. Now, this is actually basically a 2-hour program, so we're going to shorten it down to Live Living is only going to be this about 40. I'll cover with you guys the rest of it after that. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll blow through a few of the things that you probably don't really need, and I'll explain to them as we get along to it. So. All right, definition of citrus. Most of you all know what a lemon, a lime, an orange is, whatever. It's in the rue family, grown in warm regions. All right, easy enough. Thick rind, pulpy flesh, all that fun stuff. Flowers, this is kind of an odd screen here. About 1 to 2 months into spring growth, sometimes earlier than that. Mother Nature tends to play tricks. Sometimes it'll start to flush growth and send out new flowers right away too. So that's not a hard and fast rule. The biggest thing that I want you to remember from this screen is those last 2 words, self-fertile. I don't care what you see on the internet. Yes, there are some varieties that you may get a little bit more fruiting from if you've got a cross-pollinator, but for 99.9% of them, you just need one, all right? One citrus tree, just one plant, one tree, one whatever. You only need 1 lemon, okay? That's 1 lemon is fine. That's depends. It's a really big drink. It's no. Yes. All right. These you all kind of know what the flowers look like. They're usually a white flower, 5 petals. That's a bear's lime. How many of y'all grow Meyer lemons? My condolences. Meyer lemons are not my favorite lemon, and we'll explain that later. But you can tell Meyer lemons from most of the other ones because it's got this purple tint to it, okay? All right, the fruit, unique type berry called a Hesperidum. This is all the fun stuff that you'll get to know if you ever get put on Jeopardy. All right, when Alex Trebek asks you, just remember when you win the $1 million, who told you all this? The outer colored part, also known as the zest, to most of us cooks, is also known as the flavodo. The inner white spongy part is the albedo. All right, like I said, Alex Trebek, you don't have to remember all this. There will be a test later, but all right, I do have, this is some of the fruit from my trees. Yes, I do have a Meyer lemon. The running joke with a Meyer lemon is 1, it's not a true lemon. It's actually a cross between a sweet orange and a lemon. All right, 2, I kind of had a dog of a tree and the fruit was just disgusting. I mean, every time I tried to make something with it, it was like, oh, gross. So I, whatever. 3, whenever I did any kind of event, I mean, it could be a stump to chump, it could be a lecture like this or anything like that. If there was 5 people there, 3 of them would come up with a Meyer lemon question. And it just got to be kind of a running joke with my family. Somebody would be, hey, can I ask you a citrus question? My mother would be like, here comes a Meyer lemon question. And sure enough, it was. So it got to be kind of a running joke. Calamundan, this is a Kumquat Mandarin hybrid. This was actually my very first citrus tree, and I'll fill you in on that story later too. People always ask me, I grow all 55 of mine in containers. Why? Because I rent. 2, I work at a garden center, so I can get all the pots and potting soil and stuff that I want. 3, I like to rearrange things. You know, if the plant's not happy or I'm tired of the way the yard looks, I can just rearrange things real easily. Well, usually the question I get is, do you actually get fruit out of a tree in a pot? I present Exhibit A. All right, that's my Nagami Kumquat. And it's usually more fruit than the wife and I can ever use. So, I mean, and a lot of my trees are like that. I end up giving a lot away. As you can tell, I like to eat, so I make pies and cookies and cakes. And Caracara red navel orange. I want you to remember that picture. It will come up again later. This is a ruby red grapefruit. This is all stuff from my yard. Variegated Eureka lemon. This one's kind of cool. The fruit is variegated. The leaves are variegated. When the lemon is ripe, it will actually turn yellow, but this is the original pink lemonade. The flesh is pink. All right. This is one if you want to mess with your neighbors. This is Citrus Medica Buddha's hand. There's no flesh to this. There's no pulp, no seeds, anything. It's basically just all rind and albedo. All right. People ask, well, what can you do with it? Have you ever eaten fruitcake? You know, little pieces of candied citron. There it is. I don't want to know what just fell behind me. That's all right. But what's fun about this one is if you want to mess with your neighbors, tell them you're growing aliens. Okay. All right, this is a part that we'll kind of blow through real fast. I put this in here for the master gardeners because they were always getting questions of, I've got this citrus tree, but I don't know what it is. You know, is it a grapefruit? Is it an orange? Is it a lemon? Blah, blah, blah. Well, I can at least get you into the right type of fruit with the leaves, whether it be a grapefruit or a lemon or whatever. Most of it has to do with the petiole, which is the smaller section of the leaf. But we'll just blow through a few of these. You can see some of the differences. You know, like I said, there will be a test, so you have to remember all this. Not. Key lime, you've got a very small leaf, things like that. This one, however, I want you to remember. This is Panceris trifoliata, also known as flying dragon. There's a straight version of it, but it's still Panceris. It's got that trifoliate leaf to it. All right, I want you to remember that. And this one, this is Swingle citramello. This is a cross between the flying dragon and Citrus paradisi, which is your grapefruit. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? I know I've kind of blew through some of the basics real quick. Okay. All right. Blossom drop. This is something that will happen to you, and you will have a heart attack if you don't know what's happening. Even if you do know what's happening, you may end up having a heart attack. The trees are smarter than we are. They know how much fruit they can handle on any given season. A lot of it has to depend on how well it was watered and stuff like that, but it's called June drop, which is a horrible name for it because it happens in May here in Charleston, but that's besides the point. A few reasons that June drop might get exasperated and be even more so if they're not fertilized prior to the bloom period. All right, we'll talk about fertilizers here in a few minutes. Improper irrigation. They should never really be allowed to stress for water. You really shouldn't stress any plants, and again, we'll talk about water here in a minute. High temperature, low humidity. For those of you on the live living, Charleston has a lot of both of those, so we don't have to worry about that too much, okay? All right, sunlight. Those of you that are gardeners know that full sunlight or full amount of sun is anywhere from 7 to 8 hours, correct? Okay. Citrus need full sun, 8 to 10 hours recommended, if not more. 6 hours or less will produce weak foliage, lack of flowering, which will mean lack of fruit. If you're going to grow them in a container like I do, you have to be careful because the root zone can actually hit 120 degrees in full sun if you use black pots like I do. You can use the Krylon paint, you know, the different colors and stuff like that. Paint them white. That way it'll kind of cool it off a little bit. You can do a pot in a pot system. Okay, that way it's got a little bit of an airflow and stuff to it. I was at an event one time and a gentleman came up to me. He was having trouble with his Meyer Lemon, of all things. And his tree was stopping. It wasn't flowering. It wasn't fruiting anymore. He's had it for years. It just stopped. I said, well, how much sun's it getting? He said, no, it's getting full sun. I'm not worried about that. I said, all right. So we went through water and fertilizers and all that stuff. He said, everything was fine. I said, how much sun's it get? He said, full sun, that's not the problem. So I went through pests. I mean, I was getting frustrated. I could not come up with anything else. So I finally went back to him one last time with the sunlight. I said, in hours, how many hours of sunlight is he getting? 4. Step away from the tree and get an artificial one. So basically, if you've got a lot of sunlight, you can grow citrus, all right? There's always going to be the one smart aleck. I've got one friend of mine in the Camellia Society that will come up to me and say, Darren, how much sunlight does a citrus need? And I know where he's going with this. I said 7 to 8 hours minimum. He'll go, mine's only getting 6 and I got fruit on it. Shut up. Any questions on sunlight? I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Okay. Water requirements. This is one that is probably the hardest thing to teach people. Okay. Most people will either overwater or underwater. Yes, sir.
We've got a question from Maplewood site up in Massachusetts.
Okay.
About indoor growing. How many hours of indoor light is recommended?
The same thing. I would give it at least 7 to 8 hours of sunlight. If you know, artificial light and/or sunlight and a combination thereof. All right. Thank you. Water requirements. Like I said, this is one of the hardest things to teach most people: overwater or underwater. How many of you all have ever seen in books, online, whatever, that a certain plant needs 1 inch of water per week? Y'all have seen that, right? That is the stupidest sentence I have ever seen. If you've got a real sandy base soil, how long will that 1 inch of water last? 10 minutes if you're lucky. If you've got a real heavy clay or peat soil, how long do you think that 1 inch of water will last? It'll be there come Christmas. So right there, that already blows that out of the water. No pun intended, actually pun intended. It also is going to depend on your citrus tree size. If you've got a tree that's 3 foot tall or 30 feet tall, which one's going to need more water? 30 feet, exactly. Species, key lime or grapefruit, which one do you think would need more water? I love a smart crowd, that's great. You don't want to have your plants stressed for water. I purposely did not water this plant for a couple weeks. No plants were harmed into making this PowerPoint, it's fine, I promise. The leaves will actually start to wilt. Now, a friend of mine were talking one day, if you overwater a plant, they will also wilt. We've neither one of us are brave enough to really try this, but we think that if it's wilting for water, you know, it's dry, the leaves will curl up. If it's overwatered and it's developing root rot, the leaves will curl down. It's an interesting theory. Like I said, neither one of us have really gotten brave enough to try it, but it is a possibility. Basically, you want to keep the soil about the consistency of a wrung out dish sponge. You want to keep the soil about the consistency of a wrung out dish sponge, your dampness, all right? Not too, they like moisture, but they don't like wet feet. The best thing you can do is use your water meter that you've got with you every day. Stick your finger in the soil, okay? If it's dry up to your second knuckle, go ahead and water it. This goes well for in the ground or in a container. If you're in a container, what you can do is either use the finger or pick the pot up, water it real thoroughly, pick it up, get a feel for that weight, all right? Or you can tip it over a little bit and just kind of get the feel for it. Wait 2 or 3 days and then do it again. If it still feels real heavy, probably doesn't need water. If you pick it up and accidentally throw it through the roof, it probably needs some water, it's a little dry, all right? Does that all make sense so far? Any questions on watering? All righty. You must feed these poor plants. I was at another event, woman came up to me. She'd had a plant, it was a Meyer Lemon. She had it in a container, she had had it for about 4 or 5 years. And the leaves were starting to turn yellow. I said, all right, well, how much sun? That was fine, water was fine. I said, what are you feeding it? She says, I have to feed it? Step away from the plant, get an artificial one. Citrus trees are heavy nitrogen feeders. Everything that you've ever heard about for flowering plants, throw that out the window for citrus, okay? They prefer a 5-1-3 is the perfect ratio, all right? 211 is okay, but 513 is the better one. You can use pretty much any fertilizer that you want, especially if it's within that range, as long as it's got all the trace minerals and all those fun things. My favorite to use is Espoma Citrus Tone. All right. For those of you on the live living, you're probably going to have to order it online, like up in Massachusetts and places like that, that are you know, a little harder to find. Here, we can find it at pretty much any good garden store, even Walmart and stuff like that. Yes. It's put out by Espoma. It's called Citrus Tone. They've got Tomato Tone and Holly Tone and all those different ones. Citrus Tone is what I use. You want to feed them every 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. Now, the caveat to that is if they are in the ground, you want to start about Valentine's Day, stop about Labor Day. That's here in Zone 8. All right. For other places, it's going to be a little bit different. If you're in a container and you're planning on protecting it over the winter, you can feed them all year round every 6 to 8 weeks. All right. The nice stuff about the Espoma is you can just sprinkle it around on the top of the soil, water it in, you're good to go. Yes.
Sprinkle it around.
Yeah, sprinkle it around the good question. The question is, you sprinkle it around the drip zone. Yeah, get it out as far to the drip zone. You know, drip zone is where the ends of the leaves are if you're in the ground. If it's in the container, of course, you can only get as far as the container and be that. You can use slow release. I do use slow release, i.e. Osmocote and things like that. I don't use it a lot because of that first word, slow. Remember I told you citrus are heavy nitrogen feeders? I use it as a backup IV drip system, basically. Okay, does that make sense? That way, if I do happen to miss a feeding or it goes 9 weeks or whatever, I know that there's still at least a little bit of the slow release going in there. How many of y'all have used those fertilizer stakes? You know, the spikes. Oh, I got a couple people. Oh, not good. Don't use those things. I don't like them at all. They're garbage. The theory behind them is great. You've got your fertilizer, you stick it in the ground, you're good to go. Okay. Nitrogen, your first number, moves through the soil very easily. No problem. Phosphorus and potassium, your second and third numbers, do not. So you take the fertilizer, you stick it in the ground, your nitrogen's moving around, that's good. Phosphorus and potassium are sitting here like a lump on a log. Well, what happens when the roots start heading towards that fertilizer? They're going to hit it and burn. There's also a lot of sodium in those things. And unless your citrus is half deer, you probably don't need the salt lick. Not even a chuckle on that one. Okay, fine. That was one of my better ones too, so I'm in trouble. All right, this is what nitrogen deficiency will look like. This is another reason why I grow mine in containers. This one had gotten kind of shoved back into a corner, so I kept missing it every time I fed it. What you want to look for is yellowing of the leaves, stunted growth. You know, this poor thing was probably half the size of what it should have been compared to its next door neighbor, only because I just kept missing to fertilize it. All right. You can use the water soluble types, i.e. Miracle Grow for acid loving plants. I miss the old Meracid. One word, nice and easy. Miracle Grow for acid. Anyway, you can use that stuff. It's good stuff, don't get me wrong. I don't use a lot of it. I treat it more as giving my plants candy. All right. The Espoma and some of the organic stuff, you feed the soil. The Miracle Grow, you feed the plants. So if you akin it to giving your kids candy all the time, yeah, they're going to grow up, but they may not be quite as healthy as they could be. My opinion, but that's just the way I look at it. Soil pH, 6.3 to 6.8. Put my Master Gardener hat on for a minute. Get your soil tested if you're going to plant it in the ground. Okay? Any questions so far? Yes, ma'am. Question is fish emulsion. Do I use that for citrus? Yes. I do use it occasionally as a nice foliar feed. You know, if I happen to have some, or I'm in between feedings or whatever, and they might start to look a little peaked or whatever, yeah, I'll just go ahead and give them a good, just remember you want to probably do it before you bring them inside, especially if you have cats. Yeah, exactly. Yes, ma'am. Excellent question. What kind of soil should you use in containers? There's three things that you should remember about using potting soil, right? And this goes for any plants, okay? Citrus included. The three basic things that you need to remember is one, you want it to be well draining, all right? So you don't want to use straight peat moss, makes sense. You want it to be able to retain some moisture. So you don't want to use straight sand, again, makes sense. It's got to be sturdy enough to support the plant. So you don't want to use straight perlite. Use a combination of those three, you're good to go. Out of the 55 citrus and 220 camellias that I've got, there's probably 230 different mixes. As long as I cover those three basics, it doesn't matter what's in it. You can add compost, you can add bat guano, you can, whatever you've got is fine, as long as you've got those three basics covered. All right? Yes, sir. No, the one of the slides said something about feeding before blooming. That's why I try to feed in February, around about Valentine's Day. There's two reasons. One, they usually haven't started to flower by then unless we have a warm winter. You know, this past winter kind of screwed me up a little bit. The other reason that I feed them that early is because the soil needs to be broken down, or the fertilizer needs to be broken down in the soil so the microbes can start to eat it so the plant can use it. By the time it normally warms up enough that the plant has started to kick off growth, the microbes have eaten the fertilizer down. Does that make sense? So that's why I use Valentine's Day. Like the folks up in Massachusetts, they're not even thinking about gardening in February unless they're indoors. So yes, ma'am. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. It could be fertilization. The question is, her fruit is still very small. It's probably just in a plateau right now. Our rain has been very haphazard, and if you haven't been watering it consistently, that will have something to do with it. Fertilizer could have something to do with it. Fruit here in Charleston does not usually ripen until November. It'll flower in February, March, April, but it won't be ripe until November. Okay, so that's why it hasn't turned yellow yet. All right. Any other questions? What we covered so far?
That June drop thing.
Yes.
I think probably, I don't know how many of you. I've suffered from it mightily, and I just wonder, was it because I live on falling, most of the dirt out there is sand.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some way I can tell what my sand is before I start to plant, or some way I can get it analyzed someplace?
Yeah, you can take your soil to the master gardeners and get it analyzed for that. When it comes to the June drop, there's a couple things. Make sure that you keep the moisture level consistent. If your moisture level is doing this, what the tree's going to do is think, I don't know if I can keep all this fruit, so I'm going to throw a lot of it. All right. If it's not fertilized prior to, you know, if you don't start feeding it early enough, again, I might be a little hungry. I might not be able to keep all the fruit. A third possibility, and I didn't really talk much about this, is pollination. If the flowers do not get pollinated, you know, if the weather is kind of cool and the bees are not out there, the fruit won't get pollinated. If it doesn't get pollinated, it'll abort it. Okay. Now, to fix that, what you can do is you can take a little tiny paintbrush when it's flowering and literally just dab from flower to flower. You don't have to hit all the flowers, all right? But just, you know, hit a good many of them. Make sure you buzz like a bee so you don't freak the plant out. I actually had somebody believe me one time when I said that, so I have to be careful with that one. And you should definitely get fruit. Does that basically answer your question? All right. Any other questions so far? All right, propagation, we're just gonna blow through this real quick. I told you I've got 55 varieties. At one time I had 109. And I'm not just talking 109 trees. I had about 115 trees, I think it was. I had 119 different cultivars from all over the world. Once the quarantine started hitting stuff like that, I kind of had to, you know, stop swapping and everything. And then I got into camellias and I needed the room. But anyway, citrus trees will come true to type from seed. So if you get a lemon tree or a lemon fruit or piece of grapefruit or whatever, and you really, really like the fruit, plant the seed. All right, you will get fruit from that seed. I don't care what you read on the internet. Oh, you'll never get seed. Yes, you will. That's how nature works. That's why there's seeds in them, trying to propagate the plant on. Meyer lemons, pomelos, and temple oranges. Yes, ma'am. No, you don't want to dry them out. The more they dry out, the less germination they'll have. So you want to try to plant them as soon as you can, or keep them in a damp paper towel like in your refrigerator or something until you can plant them. A lot of the companies that do sell seed will dry them out. I'll tell you what, I have some of the worst germination rates coming from those seeds. I mean, I could get 100 seeds and I'm lucky if 60 of them germinate, which I guess 60% is not really that bad, but I mean, if I had planted all 100 right after they'd come out of the fruit, I'd probably have 99 of them. So those three that I listed before will not come true to type. Citrus seeds are polyembryonic, and we're not going to get into all that because that makes my head hurt. But basically, one seed can literally send up 2 embryos. All right, one will be a true combination of the parents. The other one will be the actual true mother. Okay, so it really gets interesting. If you ever want to look into it, let me know. There's a couple of disadvantages from growing them from seed. Patience is probably a major virtue. Key limes from seed, you could actually start to see a piece or two of fruit in 3 to 5 years. Not too terribly bad. Lemons, limes, oranges, tangerines, 5 to 7 years. Grapefruit can take anywhere from 10 to 12 years before you start seeing 1 or 2 pieces of fruit. All right, so definitely have a lot of patience. Of course, seed is easier to obtain. You know, it's a lot cheaper than it going out and buying a plant. Just remember, you're going to get something as good as, maybe even a little bit better than, or maybe not something quite as good, but it's still going to be good. All right, it's still going to be edible. It's still going to be fruit. Grafting does not change anything on the fruit. All right, if you take a sweet orange and graft it onto a Vulcamere lemon, that orange is still going to taste like an orange. It's not going to become sour like a lemon. All right, I usually get that question a lot. One of the other disadvantages from growing from seed is the thorns. Kind of like that. You plant that under your daughter's window, nobody's getting in or out of that thing. All right, you can root cuttings. Actually, now is the best time to be doing it, June, July, and August. I'll be honest with you, it's a pain in the neck, and we're not even going to talk about it that much, okay? So just remember, it can be done. You just need like a mist system, greenhouse, all sorts of fun things like that. Pruning, there's really no standard manual for pruning citrus trees. Just like every other shrub or bush, if you've got branches that are crisscrossing with each other, you want to go ahead and cut one of those off. You're just asking for insect and disease problems because the bark is being rubbed off. If you've got dead or dying branches, go ahead and cut those off. Anything that's growing inward of the plant, you want to go ahead and cut off. You remember the trifoliate leaf that I told you about? A lot of citrus is grafted. So anything that grows below that graft line, and if you're not sure if your tree is grafted, look about 2 to 3 inches above the soil line, you'll see like a little dog leg. Anything below that dog leg is more than likely rootstock. That's where the trifoliate leaf comes in. All right, so if you see any of those type of leaves, then you know you need to cut those off.
What time of year should you do the pruning?
That's good. What time of year should you do the pruning? My favorite time to do it is usually never. No, I try to do it in like January or February before the flush of growth and everything else. The biggest problem with pruning is that you're going to be cutting flowers and fruit off. You could do it right after it's done flowering, but if you end up with a little bit of, when it's done fruiting, you might end up with a warm spell and it might initiate a flush of growth, and then it's going to get cold, and if you're not planning on protecting it, you can see where the problem would be. So I try to do mine January, February if I absolutely have to. Now, occasionally you're going to get this one rogue shoot that'll come out, or your OCD is bothering you and it's kind of, the plant is like this and you want it to, you can do that at any time. All right, you're not going to damage the tree. Matter of fact, I got an email this past week from a lady in California. Hopefully she's not watching. She is so mad at her husband. They had this gorgeous lemon tree. It was like, you know, 3, 4, 5 feet tall, full of lemon. It's basically a skeleton now. It looks like a coat rack. They had gotten whitefly, and he decided to freak out and just whack the living bejeebers out of this poor thing. So the tree should be fine, but they're not going to see fruit for a few years. Anyway, the biggest thing to remember is that you're going to be cutting off flowers and fruit. So plant it in the correct spot. They're going to get big. You can keep them pruned down, all right? So that, because these trees will easily get to be 20, 25, 30 feet tall. Well, if you let them grow that big, you know where the best fruit's going to be? Up there, yeah. So unless you want to climb a ladder, best to keep them down around 8 to 10 feet, okay? All right, before we get into cold hardiness, I got to tell my favorite story. This happened here in James Island. There was a couple that came to me, and they had this grapefruit tree that was planted a little too close to the house. They wanted to know if I could come take a look at it, see if they could prune some of it off. So yeah, sure, no problem. So I showed up, and I'm looking at this tree. Beautiful tree, 15, 20 feet tall, loaded with grapefruit, gorgeous. I knew people in Florida would be jealous of this thing. So I'm looking at it, and I told them, yeah, you can prune that off. It's certainly not going to hurt it. And I said, wow, this must be an old tree. They said, no, it's only about 7 or 8 years old. No, you must have planted a huge, no, we planted it from seed. Remember what I said about growing grapefruits from seed? So it's like, there's no way this is from seed. They said, yeah, we planted it so-and-so's birthday or something like that. I said, oh my God, this thing's huge. I said, what are you feeding this thing? They said, nothing. What are you watering it with? Just city water when it doesn't rain. I'm kicking the soil. It's just typical James Island sandy soil. I said, this is amazing. What? They finally told me what happened. It was growing on an old septic tank. The fruit did not taste crappy, I promise. I did try it, okay? But so if you want a really big, fast-growing citrus tree, find your septic tank. All right, any questions on sun? What did we cover? Fertilizer, water, sun, anything like that? Any questions? Yes?
The fertilizer changes, that needs change based on your geography, where you're located, and the amount of sunlight available, that sort of thing.
No, it's still going to be a Florida plant. Think of it that way. It's still going to need 7 to 8 hours. It's still going to need the same amount of fertilizer and everything. So just because you're living in Massachusetts or wherever that was from, the tree is still going to be from Florida.
I have another question about water. The city water hurt the plant?
Depends on how much chlorine and what your pH is like. The question was, and I'm sorry, I meant to do that. Want to know if city water will hurt the plant. Normally, no, unless you've got a really bad chlorine system or something along those lines. No, it should not hurt it. Okay. All right, cold hardiness. This is the main reason why people in Maine can't grow their citrus in the ground. Citrus will handle cold temperatures down to 28 degrees for short periods of time if the plant has had a chance to go dormant. And they don't go dormant like a lot of the maples and oak trees and stuff. They don't drop their leaves. It's more of a semi-dormancy, okay? If the weather prior to the tree has been doing like 45, 50, 55, 60, and drops down to 32, the plant is going to get hurt a lot more than if it's been cruising around at 35, 38, 40, and drops down to 28. Does that make sense? So basically, the prior weather will dictate how bad the freeze event is. If you are going to plant them in the ground, here in Charleston, plant them on the south side or the west side of your house. That's your sunniest, warmest sides. You can plant them closer to a wall. Just remember, you will probably have to prune them. Citrus can take espalier very well. For those of you that don't know what an espalier is, the Reader's Digest version is basically you cut off half the tree and slap it up against the wall. Yeah, those of you that know espalier are like, oh God, no, not. You can protect them with plastic sheeting and with Christmas lights. Remember the old C7, C9, you know, the ones that used to get so hot? You wrap them around your plant, throw a sheet of plastic over it, you just bought yourself 10 degrees of protection. For those of you up north and other places like that, you're probably not going to be able to pull that one off as easily. Back when I had 109 trees, I used to create a artificial greenhouse out of PVC pipe and heavy mill plastic. I throw a little electric heater in there, everything was fine. I continued to feed mine all year round though, thinking I was protecting them. Well, one year it got really, really cold, dropped down to 30 degrees in the little greenhouse. That's all the damage I had. That was on a cocktail grapefruit. It was just the new flush of growth. Everything else around it is fine. You also want to make sure that you water your plants extremely well before a freeze event. A well-watered plant can handle cold better than a dry one, okay? One last picture of some of the other stuff that happened. That's a completely unprotected Republic of Texas orange, 18 degrees in a container. Looks like a crispy critter, doesn't it? What would you all probably have done with that plant? Let's see, matches, pruners, yeah, anything like that, yeah. Believe it or not, that was the following summer. I did nothing to it, absolutely nothing. They can handle down colder than we think they can. Remember 2018 here in Charleston, we had a really bad 2018 winter. Remember all the snow and ice and all? That's the winter that shall not be spoken of. I saw that coming. I did not realize how bad it was going to be, but I did see it coming. So I had kind of given up on the whole PVC pipe and all that type of stuff because it was more of a pain in the neck than it was worth, because we only really need that type of protection for a couple days out of the year. So what I did was I took all of my plants that didn't make it into the greenhouse and literally laid them down on their side, you know, like the wind had blown them over. Under that dumpster fire of a mess that you're looking at there, there's about 15 trees. I've watered them real well, laid them down, threw all that stuff on top of it. That's a tarp and an old crocheted blanket and some frost cloth, just whatever I could find to cover it. Those trees were like that for 3 weeks before I finally got around to them. I was afraid to go out there. I just knew they were all crispy critters. That's what they look like after 3 weeks under the tarp. You don't have to keep it a tropical paradise under there. You just need to keep it at or above freezing. Our ground doesn't freeze solid here, so it worked beautifully. There's one more picture of it. I was actually eating kumquats off of the tree while I was standing the rest of them up. So you don't even have to necessarily wheel them into your garage. All right. If it does freeze damage down to the root or down, you know, we do get some cold and it does get damaged, don't do anything, just stand there. All right, don't freak out, don't start chopping your plant all the smithereens and everything else. It could come back. That Republic of Texas orange is a perfect example. Yes, it did have, eventually I did finally cut off a little bit of tip damage that it had. It was maybe 1 or 2 inches on a few branches here and there, nothing major, all right? You do want to keep an eye on the tree, because a lot of times when we have fluctuating weather like that, you'll get something that's called gummosis, or the bark will loosen and split. All right, so you want to keep an eye on that. There's also something called a false start. And what happens is basically, here's your citrus tree. It may get damaged down in here. All right, well, it warms up and the plant starts, hey, it's warm, I'm going to start growing. And then all of a sudden it'll start to wilt and die. What has happened was, because it was damaged down here, it's burned up all the energy through this part of the plant, and it can't get any more from the roots. So you want to make sure that that isn't happening before you start cutting. You want to make sure that you cut enough of the tree off, but you don't want to cut too much of the tree. All right, make sense? Still with me so far? Good. Hope you all are still with me too. All right, don't necessarily remove any of the leaves. I just let the tree naturally drop those Republic of Texas. There was actually a couple leaves in the very center of it that still look halfway green. That's how I knew the tree was going to be okay. You can also scratch the bark. If you're not completely sure if the tree is dead, or, you know, start as high up as you can and just scratch a little bit of the bark. If you see green, you're good. If you see brown, you might want to move down a few inches and try again. If you keep going down and you get all the way to the ground and it's brown, then it's probably dead. You can toss that one. If the tree is killed below the graft, told you about the graft, you can replace the tree. Well, that's the most obvious thing. You can allow the rootstock to grow. Remember the trifoliate leaf that I told you? The Swingle citrumello, the one that's a Citrus paradisi and Swingle, or a Citrus paradisi and the trifoliata hybrid can be used as a grapefruit substitute. Fruit's actually not too bad. The flying dragon, the little bit one, the fruit will be about the size of a ping pong ball or so. They'll be fuzzy, have about 45 seeds in them. It tastes like kerosene. Other than that, they're great. You can actually grow Poncirus trifoliata as far north as Maine. It's one of the few deciduous citrus trees. It will actually drop all of its leaves in the wintertime, and they're really kind of cool. Or you can regraft. My grafting skills are getting better. So far, I've grafted 26 citrus trees and 27 have died. Oh, folks up in Canada can actually grow citrus trees. This is a guy up in British Columbia. If he can grow a Meyer Lemon up there, I know we can do it here in Charleston. And I'm sure there's others out there that can do it if he can do it up in Canada. But that's using the lights and using like a cold protection system. Okay? Yes, any questions on cold protection? Yes. Uh-huh. Is it rootstock, or the question is, in case you didn't hear it, she had a lemon tree from a couple of years ago that got killed back by that storm. And it's got a whole bunch of sprouts coming up. Are you sure it's lemon or if it's rootstock? Right. I mean, if it's rooted, you know, or if it was a rooted lemon, you should be fine. And what you can do is just thin it out to maybe 3 or 4, you know, stems. As soon as I look at it, I'll know. As soon as I look at the leaves, I'll know what it is. If it's, I had a woman, this from a freeze that we had a few odd years ago, had a woman very similar to your situation. She had a lemon tree, died back. It came back and she was all excited. Well, it got to be this huge tree. And when she went to eat the fruit, it was disgusting. It was that Poncirus. What had happened was the rootstock had come back and she didn't know. She thought it was the original lemon. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look at that afterwards. Any more questions on cold protection or anything we've covered so far? Yeah, that's why you want to keep it about the consistency of a wrung out dish sponge. That's why you want to keep it about the consistency of a wrung out dish sponge. You want to keep them damp, but not wet. Because what'll happen is if you let them dry, it starts to think that it's going into a death mode, so it's going to abort fruit. Now, on that same theory, back in the gazillion years ago, the royal kings loved the smell of citrus blossoms. So they would build what they called orangeries, basically a greenhouse. The royal gardeners would actually let the trees almost dry out to death and then would water them. Well, the tree would think it went into a death mode and, you know, it's going to live. So it would flower profusely trying to survive. It went into reproduction mode. So if you have a tree that, you know, you have let dry out and then watered it and it starts flowering in a weird time of the year, that's what's happened. All right. I've actually had some that'll bloom in July and August because I didn't water them real well in June and they freaked out. Any other questions on cold? Yes, ma'am. Oh, it doesn't matter. That's fine. It's probably going to be one of those things. I mean, if you want to, I would, if I'd known you were going to come and you could have brought some of the leaves, I could have told. Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely talk afterwards. Basically, to answer your question about the transplanting and stuff like that, you want to try to guess how many years it's been in the ground? So, so in other words, it's a fairly well-established tree, but because it's in the shade, it's small. Is that what you're saying, basically? Okay. When you're transplanting trees, and again, this will go for any type of shrub or whatever, you want to try to dig, and the best time to do that is probably going to be in November, when it's more or less dormant. Dig as big of a root ball as you can possibly get, all right? And then kind of guesstimate, you're probably going to hurt at least a third of the roots. You're going to want to go ahead and cut off about a third of the canopy, because what's happened is you've cut off the life support to what it was, and then go ahead and transplant it that way. That would be your best bet. It's probably not going to be easy if that tree's been established that long. Has it flowered or fruited or done anything, or just kind of hung out there and did whatever, huh? Okay. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir. Excellent question. If they're in a pot, do you have to keep putting them in bigger pots? A lot of that is going to depend on a couple of things. One, if you're going to be protecting them and if you're going to be moving them, yeah, you probably want to get to a certain size pot and be done, okay? I can also make the argument for some people go from this pot to this pot to this pot to this pot, or some go from this pot to this pot, all right? A lot of that has to do with your watering. If you're on an irrigation system, you want to try to keep everything about the same size pot as you can. All right. I hand water everything. So if I've got a pot this big, I know that that one only needs about 10 seconds. If I got about a pot this big, I know it needs a minute and a half for lack of whatever. So yes, you do have to repot them. If you want to try to keep them in the same size pot, you can basically do like I was telling her just now about transplanting them. Pull them out of the pot, prune about a third of the roots off, prune about a third of the canopy off, and then put it back in that same pot with different soil. Okay, does that more or less answer your question? How I can tell when my plants need to be repotted, if I have to pick them up 3 times within a week because the wind keeps blowing them over, I know they're too heavy, so I need to transplant it. So, yes. How do you compensate for torrential rains that we've had for a week? That's where your soil is going to be very important. As long as you don't have an irrigation system running it, okay, and it's not standing in water, you'll be fine. All right, because pots dry out a lot faster than in the ground. Now that's what you're talking about, right? Is it in a container or in the ground? You're in the ground. Okay, ones that are in the ground. There's not a whole bunch you can do. I mean, just don't add any extra water to it. Where do you live at? Okay, James Mountain. So you've got fairly sandy soil. You're decent soil anyway. You shouldn't have a problem. Were you here for the 1,000-year flood a couple years ago? Did it have any problems then? Oh, well, that could be a problem then. That's because my other question was going to be salt intrusion can be a problem at times. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not much you can do about salt intrusion other than possibly replace, move the plant and hope that it, you can. Again, though, it's going to depend on how much rain we've had and everything. You don't want to overwater it. And if it's sitting there, it's really kind of a case-by-case basis. I mean, I could give you a generalization, but yours might be a little bit different than others. See what I'm saying? Yes, sir. I know this is going to, the question is, he's got a lime tree that it looks nice and green and healthy and it doesn't have to show a sign of fruit. This question may sound silly, but I have a reason for asking it. Are you sure it's a lime tree? And I'll tell you a quick story why I asked that. Again, I was at another event. I had a couple come in and along the same lines, they had a row of 5 citrus trees. Well, 2 of them had died. Okay. So they went to a big box store, I won't mention Lowe's, and bought 2 citrus trees, put them in the plant and put them in there with the other 3, and they were growing beautifully, never flowered, never fruited. 3, 4, 5 years went by, never flowered, never grew like a weed. I said, that's kind of weird. Well, they had just happened to live just down the road from this event. I said, is there any way you can bring me back some leaves so I can take a look at it? They said, yeah, sure. As soon as they walked in the door, I knew what was wrong. It was ligustrum. Somebody had switched the tags at the store. So that's why I always ask to make sure if you crush the leaves, do they have a citrusy scent to them? Okay. Try crushing the leaves and see if it smells lemony, limey, whatever. If that's the case, then start going with what we've covered so far. How much sun is it getting? How much sun is it getting? At least 8 hours, and you've been feeding it and watering it and everything. Have you been talking to it nice? Yeah, I'll tell you what. If you can, grab one of my cards and send me some pictures of it, and let me take a look at it, and maybe I can figure out what's going on real quick. Excuse me, folks, while I wake the computer back up. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it could very well be just something, silly. Where did you get the tree from? Let's start with that. Randy should have sold you a decent tree. Because I was going to say, if it's from seed, it's possible that it just isn't old enough yet. But if it was already an established plant, yeah, definitely crush the leaves and see if it smells citrusy first, and we can go from there. And then, like I said, you get my email and just send me some questions or whatever, pictures or whatever, okay? Yes, ma'am.
You said plants from seed have thorns. I'm assuming that plants that are grafted or rootstock are thornless?
They will still, some of them will still have thorns. Some of them are really evil. The finger limes are really evil. They're worse than roses. Most citrus trees will have thorns. It's just that the younger ones tend to be thornier. Does that make sense? If for some reason the thorns are bothering you, i.e. you've got children, grandchildren, pets, whatever, you can take a pair of toenail clippers and just clip off the thorns. It's not going to hurt the tree at all. All right. I mean, you don't have to go all the way up, but I mean, if you got a kid that's this tall, cut a few of the thorns from there. That way you don't have to worry about them poking an eye out or anything. All right. Any other questions of what we covered so far? Yes.
Would you mind taking a quick look at this and see if it's something that everybody could share? It's this one, and then this one, and yeah, there's another one in here.
Oops.
There for you. Or just.
I'll tell you what, we'll show it to them afterwards.
I know.
I just don't want to mess up the lives of.
I wondered if there was anything that stood out that you might need to share, how this thing is growing, how tall is it?
Only thing is the OCD would bother me. The picture that he's got, it looks like, is that a lime?
Yeah.
Okay. The lime tree is about yay tall, and it's got this one branch that's sticking out like this. I'm OCD. I'd have to cut that thing off. That would drive me nuts. But other than that, no, I mean, they look pretty good. The one tree looks like it's a little chlorotic. It needs a little fertilizer. But other than that, they don't look bad. You're probably the fertilizer. I'd be willing to bet that. Yeah, no, you're fine. All right, any other questions before we get into pests? How are we doing on time, sir? Good, all right. All right, I'm gonna pass this around. This is bird damage. Here we've got mockingbirds that are, let's just say they're not nice little birds. They tend to play ping pong with the fruit. All right, squirrels will also do damage. Where's my friend that brought this in? Oh, there you are, right there. She's right in front of me. What I'm going to pass around, this has got some bird and squirrel damage on it. All right, so you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. Basically what the birds do, and I haven't figured out the rules to the game yet, but the fruit will be hanging there, the bird will peck at it, and the fruit will swing out and come back, and the bird will peck at it. And like I said, I don't know the rules. I don't know who wins. I know the fruit loses. All right. This can also happen with thorns. Again, if the thorns are bothering you every time the wind blows, sometimes it'll blow them into the thorns. Scale, everybody's probably dealt with scale on their plants at one time or another. If you've got scale this bad, let me know so that I can take out stock in Neem Oil, because that's the best product to use on them. N-E-E-M, Neem Oil. All right, basically it's a horticultural oil that will suffocate scale, okay? Do not spray the neem oil if it's sunny and over 75 degrees. You'll basically turn your plant into Kentucky Fried Chicken. All right. Do it in the evening after the sun is set, or do it on a cloudy day when the temperatures are a little cooler. Okay. If you've got it that bad on your fruit, I definitely want to know so I can take out stock in neem oil. Remember the Caracara red navel orange I told you about, to remember the picture? That was the very first time that fruit was going to be ripe for me. I was so excited. I went and started to pick it, and I found that. Mealybugs in the navel. We got any doctors here that would sound like a really bad diagnosis? No? Okay, good. Basically what I did was I took my garden hose and I just sprayed out the bugs and the ants. Fruit was fine. It was actually very good. You can also use insecticidal soap. All right, what that does is that basically dries out the bugs. They also like to get in between key limes. Spider mites, we don't have too much of a problem with this. This is more of a problem if you're growing them indoors. They kind of like the dry, lack of humidity inside. Neem oil will take care of them. Anything labeled for arachnids or mites will take care of those, okay? Aphids, again, this is a soft-bodied insect. Your insecticidal soap will take care of this. If you have aphids that bad, let me know so I can take stock out in insecticidal soap. Leaf miner, this is one that it's a fairly new problem here in Charleston. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country. I know down in Florida and most of the Southeast, it's bad. Basically, it's a nocturnal moth. She flies around at night and lays her eggs on the undersides of the leaves. When that egg hatches, that larvae literally burrows its way through the epidermis layers of the leaves. All right? It's more of a cosmetic damage. Your leaves will look like that. How many of y'all have gotten leaves that they're all gnarly and crinkled? And that's what that is. It's citrus leaf miner. Cosmetic damage, again, if you're OCD, you can just cut them off or just leave them. It's not hurting the plant. As long as there's green, it's still photosynthesizing. I see a question? No? Okay. Oh, thank you. I don't know what I'll do with it. But yeah, that's all that is. All right, whitefly, again, insecticidal soap. They're not a problem too much. The nice thing about most of these bugs is, believe it or not, I think they've got a calendar, and they say that, hey, this year it's a problem with the whiteflies, aphids stay away, because they don't all seem to attack at once. I've never had more than 1 or 2 different types of pests at one time in my grove. This one, yes, sir. If I try to keep everything as organic as I can, I will definitely pull out the 7 or the malathion if it's gotten really bad. So to answer your question, yes, the 7 dust is fine, okay? This is kind of a fun / gross bug. What does that look like to everybody? Looks like a bird came by and left it's actually a caterpillar, okay? And what it does, I mean, you see the one there with the little red tongue sticking out? If you poke his head with a stick a few times, or if you try to grab him, he'll stick that tongue out, and boy, does the smell that comes out. Well, these little boogers are very voracious appetites. My key lime tree, when I first got into citrus, I learned about these guys. My key lime tree was only about yay tall. I was out wandering the yard one day and walked by it and looked at it and said, oh, stupid bird took a poop. Wait a minute, that bird poop moved. So I found 2 of them on the tree at the time. They weren't doing anything at the time, so I just left them. I said, that's fine, you guys, whatever. Next morning when I get out, that tree was almost completely defoliated. I said, oh, no, we ain't playing this game. Well, the problem is that turns into that. Now what do? You want your butterfly or you want your citrus? When I'm out watering, if she comes flying into the grove, I'll see her and I'll watch where she lands. I know what the eggs look like now. They're just tiny little specks. So I'll go over and I'll pick the egg off, and it's kind of cruel, but Or if she's flying around and I'm watering, I'm going, my neighbors already think I'm weird. So, oh God, he's at it again. So that's another problem that you got to worry about. Asian citrus psyllid. This is the reason why Charleston County is under quarantine. And we're going to talk about diseases here in a minute, but just remember that stupid little bug. I was trying to be nice. All right, a few other issues we'll talk about real quick. Citrus splitting. Y'all have probably had this trouble with tomatoes. It's usually the biggest thing. What has happened is, again, you need to keep your moisture level consistent. If you let it dry out too much and then you water it, the plant tries to take all that water up and the fruit can't expand fast enough, so it splits. Citrus will do the same thing. All right. Few other things that'll affect it. It usually happens during high temperatures, high humidity. August is usually the worst month for citrus splitting. If you can keep your tree well fertilized and well watered, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. Believe it or not, that fruit came off that Republic of Texas orange. That poor tree has had more problems in its life. City mold. This is one, y'all have probably seen this either like underneath crepe myrtles or maybe azaleas, stuff like that. What city mold is here's another example of it. It's basically a fungus that grows on the honeydew that aphids, whitefly, scale, things like that excrete. It drips down onto the lower leaves and the fungus grows on top of this. It's not hurting the plant other than it is interrupting the photosynthesis. All right, so if it gets to be bad enough, you can actually kill the tree. I knew I had a problem one year because I walked out and all of my citrus trees looked like that. That's where these pictures came from. I knew they had quit smoking 6 months prior to that, so I knew that wasn't the problem. Basically, the easiest thing to do is make sure you get rid of the problem first, get rid of the aphids, mealybugs, whatever the problem is, and then spray the city mold with Neem Oil, okay? Let it sit for a day or two, and then you can literally just wipe the fungus off or hose it off with a garden hose. It comes off that easy, as you can see. All right, just make sure you get rid of the problem first. All right, dry fruit, there's a couple easy explanations for this. Over maturity. If the fruit ripens in November and it's still sitting on the tree in April, it's probably going to be a little dry. Lack of water, Young trees. This is one that if you're growing them from seed, it can actually go both ways. All right, it can actually have dry fruit or it can have very watery, bland fruit. Basically, think of them as a teenager. They'll eventually grow out of it. So just give it another year or two and it should be fine. All right. Also, the excessive tree vigor related to rootstock. You can do a whole dissertation on the different combinations of rootstock to scion. Scion is the good type of fruit. Basically, the running joke in Florida is you graft your fruit onto whatever rootstock is how you want your tree to die. Because some of them have salt tolerance, some of them have nematode tolerance, some of them blah, 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 blah. So we won't get into all that. All right, a couple quick things here about diseases. This is citrus canker. This is one of the reasons why you cannot bring citrus fruit out of Florida or citrus trees out of Florida. You can bring the fruit, just not the trees, plants, twigs, stems, scion, or roots. All right. It's actually more of a problem for the fresh fruit market. All right. There's no cure for it. But if you saw that in the grocery store, would you buy it? Probably not. What about that one? Again, you're thinking fresh fruit market. Would you go, if you were at a farmer's market, would you pick up that fruit and buy it? How about that one? If I was to pick that fruit, slice it without you knowing it, and juice it, let you taste the juice, you'd never know. Guess what they use for a lot of the frozen concentrate? I just ruined the entire citrus industry in one fell swoop. All right, then citrus greening. This is the big one. This is the last little section here. This is the reason that Charleston County Colleton County and Beaufort County here in South Carolina is under quarantine. This is one of the reasons why, well, Florida's got their own problems. They've got this, they've got canker, they've got sweet orange scab, they've got black spot, Florida can just keep all that. Georgia is also completely under quarantine for citrus greening. Also known as Hung Lung Bing or yellow dragon disease. It's the most serious citrus disease in the world. It causes the fruit to not be edible. It doesn't allow it to ripen. It becomes bitter. The seeds will abort. The leaves will defoliate. The tree will be dead in 3 to 5 years. Other than that, it's no problem. Minor. There's no cure for it. That's why so many of the citrus groves down in Florida are going out of business and switching over to pomegranates and stuff like that. You remember that little citrus psyllid that I showed you about earlier? If it goes from, let's see, the citrus psyllid, if it goes from a clean tree to a clean tree, it's no worse than an aphid. If it goes from a diseased tree to your clean tree, your tree is infected within 1 hour. Again, there's no cure for it. The tree is gone. The reason Charleston County is under quarantine is because back in 2009, they found it on a grapefruit tree downtown Charleston. Well, and then they made the quarantines. They found it in Florida back in 2005, down in Miami-Dade County. They figured out what was going on, blah, blah, blah. Well, the little Asian citrus psyllid, the one that's the vector for this thing, on its own can fly up to 1 mile. Well, remember back in 2005 when they first found this disease, what the hurricane season was like down in Florida? When they had like 500 hurricanes blow. Imagine what that little bug that can fly on 1 mile on its own, what it can do in a hurricane force wind. You could literally see the disease just blowing up through Florida. All right. The other major issue with this is it mimics nutritional deficiencies. And I've got some cards up here that y'all are welcome to come by and look at the difference between nutritional deficiencies and what the citrus greening. Basically, if your leaf, if these leaves here have citrus greening, if your leaf is a mirror image of itself, you know, it's got yellow all along the edges and you can fold it over and it looks like the old ink blot test. It's probably nutritional. If it's very splotchy and shows up in different parts of the leaf, call me, call Clemson Extension, call Santa Claus, call somebody. All right. I've got Department of Plant Industries and USDA on speed dial. I'm basically the Charleston eyes in the sky. I've called them a couple of times for different places that I thought might have had it. Thankfully, they've come back negative. Back in 2009, when they found it in downtown Charleston, they literally went from door to door knocking. Hey, I see you've got a citrus tree in your yard. Would you mind if we inspect it for citrus greening? Blah, blah, blah. They inspected 3,033 trees in 2009. They found 3 infected. Thankfully, they haven't found any since then. Whether they ever lifted the ban or not, I don't know. That's to be seen. All right, those places here, like I told you, Colleton, Beaufort, and Charleston counties are under quarantine for both the psyllid and citrus greening. Those states all have either counties or parishes that are under quarantine and or the entire state, as in the state of Georgia and Florida. They keep finding it every so often. It is illegal to transport citrus plants out of a quarantine area. If you want to order some online, all right, all fine and dandy, just make sure that that place can send them or that can ship them. I only know of 2 nurseries down in Florida that is allowed to ship. They grow all of their citrus trees under netting, basically, you know, giant nets so bugs can't get to it. The trucks are loaded inside this netting. The boxes or the plants are put into boxes sealed up completely, basically hermetically sealed. And that's the only way they can ship out of state. All right. That's why there's only 2 of them, because they've got to jump through so many hoops. It's not economical. All right. I forget where I was going with the rest of that. But anyway, oh, I know. The fine for transporting citrus trees out of from a quarantine area into a non-quarantine area. They will confiscate the tree, they will destroy the tree, and could easily be up to a $5,000 fine. That's how serious they are. Okay? That's why you can grow. The question is, where do you buy your trees? If you buy them at like Lowe's or any place like that, they should have come, hopefully, you know, they've been inspected by DPI and USDA and all that. They should have come from a clean place. If you go online and find a place, hopefully if it's a reputable nursery, they will say, yes, I can ship them to you, or no, I can't ship them to you, I'm in a dirty county. Okay? Check with them. Best thing to do is ask. I mean, if they're going to lie to you that badly, then there's also a website. It's saveourcitrus.org. It's a very good website. We'll tell you where all the different counties and different places are that it's under quarantine. All right. And again, for my folks on the Live Living Network, if you go to thecitrusguy.com, you can get a lot of this information. You can also contact me, get my newsletter. I've got some business cards here, stuff like that. If you ever have any questions, comments, whatever, glad to ask them. That's my citrus grow of 1 year. I'm supposed to always tell the story about the greenhouse. The little white section, I told my wife I was going to build a greenhouse 1 year. So I went out there, I was building it. She came out one time and said, you know, it's not going to be big enough. Honey, it'll be fine. I'm just going to put a few plants in here. That's fine. It's not going to be big enough. The very next year, I added the other 8 by 10 foot section onto it. Don't tell her she was right. So other than that, questions, comments, complaints?
Thank you from Massachusetts and Connecticut.
Massachusetts and Connecticut. All right. Y'all are still cold up there.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Live Living Network.